Добрий день, я вітаю всіх.
Good morning. I'm welcoming everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. My name is Olena. Let me remind you that now we're working on a new platform. We're working in a community space Urban 500, and we start our day with the presentation and discussion of an analytical report. We will be talking about Ukraine's efforts in search for missing persons and how the state supports their families. So let me introduce our speakers. Joining us in the studio today are Aliona Luniova, Advocacy Manager at ZMINA Human Rights Center. Also joining us is Dmitro Bogatyuk, Head of the Department for Persons Missing in Special Circumstances of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine. Also joining us is Olena Bieliachkova, Coordinator for Group of Families of Prisoners of War at Media Initiative for Human Rights, and Liubov Tkachenko, Mother of Roman Tkachenko, a missing soldier of a military unit A7376. So good morning, dear guests. Thank you for joining us in our studio. So Ms. Aliona, let me start with the key statements of this report. So what have you been able to find out? What is the situation? Good morning, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for your hospitality once again. Well, in fact, the law on rights of persons missing in action was adopted in 2018, and we were trying to track the way it operates. It was difficult to say it was efficient, and I think that the full-scale invasion became such a push to make this law gain that weight it was supposed to gain. And just last year there was a joint register of the missing persons was created. I know that the government commissioner on the rights of missing persons position was established, and we've decided to check whether the provisions of this law are efficient. Do they remain efficient and such as those satisfying the needs of the families of the persons missing in action? And I think that it's important to discuss the efficiency of the law with those whom it was written for. So in coordination with Media Initiative for Human Rights, we were reviewing the provisions of the law that contemplate instruments for protection of persons missing under special circumstances. We were surveying the families of the military and civilians gone missing. We were talking with the families of those who established organizations who protect the rights of the families of missing persons. And we've discussed it with the representatives of the government. So basically, we've discussed it with all of the stakeholders, all of the parties involved, and among of the key conclusions of the report is that the families have difficulty in understanding which government agencies they should address in case of their families going missing, and this system is frustrating. And given the fact that now the number of such people is quite extensive, back in the day when we were talking about this law with the ICRC, they were mentioning a figure of a little bit above 1,000, and I think that Mr. Dmitro will mention it properly, but now this figure reaches about 17,000, which is a real huge gap. And so our idea is to create this joint window in order to make sure that the families of the persons gone missing do not run around a number of government agencies getting re-traumatized again and again. When we were discussing some issues with the families of the persons gone missing about the pension, about the guaranteed disbursements, for example, they said they never knew that they were entitled to anything. So currently, it's about only 300 and something families receiving pensions for their relatives having gone missing. So I think that we should improve this picture to make sure that all of the families can get this benefit, all of the families of those gone missing. So we have to develop a clear mechanism of communication with the families of the persons gone missing. This information campaign should take into account the fact that the relatives may be elderly, they may not be so versatile in using smartphones, to click on the links to go to some website to sign up, and so on and so forth. And in case there is such a joint window, this window, they should have relevant stuff and communicate their ideas in a clear way to the families of the persons gone missing. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dmitro. Then let's talk about the official statistics, because the scale is really threatening. It's horrifying. 70,000 people. So what kind of work is being done in this area? Well, good morning. Thank you for having me here. First of all, I would like to thank for this invitation, for this opportunity to speak. I want to thank all of the civil organizations who get involved in search of persons gone missing under special circumstances. We're talking about those who were gone missing during battle operations or temporary occupation of Ukraine. So basically, media initiative for human rights, ZMINA, and Partnership for the Strong Ukraine. So if today we discuss this analytical report, we got familiarized with it, it's real quality document, and I would like to draw everyone's attention to real important issues, important problems that exist in the modern legislation and the way of coordination with the government agencies who are supposed to document the facts of persons gone missing and to maintain the registers of such persons. Well, honestly, I don't really like the questions about statistics a lot, but it's real important anyway. So let me report some figures. So for the time being, the Ministry of Internal Affairs is a custodian of a joint register of people gone missing under special circumstances. It's a humongous electronic database that accumulates all details about such persons, military, civilians, children, everybody who are officially on the search list for the time being. This database also contains data about unrecognized bodies that are still being examined by forensic specialists in relevant institutions. And in general, since the moment of establishment of the register, more than 51 entries were made, or entries about more than 51 persons were made, this 51,000 persons. This figure includes people who are still being searched, whose whereabouts are still unknown. Their number is about 42,000. Also, we have details about around 7,000 people about whom we have all relevant information obtained and whose whereabouts is already established. And the majority of them are prisoners of war who were already exchanged, and usually it happens so that a person may be considered gone missing under special circumstances, but then they are confirmed as those held captives as prisoners of war, and then as they come back, they are being deregistered from the search list, and their status in the system is being changed. And today we have about 4,000 identified bodies the majority of them are the bodies of our defenders who were considered to be missing in action, but after later forensic examinations, molecular genetic tests, their bodies were identified. And talking generally about this analytical report, during our conversation, as our conversation unfolds, you will be able to see that the state tries to solve some of those issues, but in some parts we may agree or disagree with this report, but still it's a quality document. And once again, I would like to express my appreciation of efforts of all those who got involved in its preparation. It was a colossal work, a research of legislation, survey of the respondents, response to their requests for statistic information, and so on and so forth. Mr. Dmitro, I would like to ask right away, like Ms. Alina said, a lot of people don't understand who is responsible for all those processes in Ukraine. Can we say that those who work with those problems are the Ministry of Internal Affairs? Yes, it would be right. And if we talk about the legal status of the persons gone missing under special circumstances, as it was specified by the law, it contemplates the operation of such agency as the Office of Commissioner for the Rights of Persons Gone Missing. And given the fact that this person is a part of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the Department for the Affairs of the Persons Gone Missing under special circumstances has another name, the Secretariat of the Commissioner for the Rights of Persons Missing in Action. And we are identified as a key agency aimed at ensuring the compliance with the law of Ukraine on persons gone missing under special circumstances in all humanitarian issues. In fact, there was a lot of discussion in this analytical report and others about handing over all those functions from the Ministry of Reintegration to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And I would like to say that working in this area, well, I was an investigation officer previously, and I was investigating the cases of people gone missing, the effects of violent abductions, murders, and so on and so forth. And I have understanding of how this investigation should be going. As soon as those functions are handed over to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, 90% of those cases were investigated by the investigators of Ministry of Internal Affairs. We have the Joint Analytical Center, the only certified institution in Ukraine which provides the opinions on the DNA testings. Both the samples sampled from the unrecognized bodies and the representatives of the families of those missing in action. In the Ministry of Internal Affairs, we have a joint database of DNAs, all the DNAs that were sampled from the people, from the unrecognized bodies, all of them are in the database. And that register is also maintained, that I've mentioned before, is maintained by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Also, there are people working in our department who used to work in the Ministry of Reintegration before, and even they confirm that now everything is better organized, that they don't have to submit any inquiries to police because we work in the same structure now, in the same organization. And just during a meeting with the communication between us as the representatives of Ministry of Internal Affairs, it's easy to get some information. Also, there are other units involved in work with those issues, with those problems, and we have good interaction established. All those registers are provided to Ministry of Defense, to the pension fund, to coordination staff for coordination staff for the affairs of the prisoners of war. And all of the documents are being added to this register. Pictures, reports, questionnaires, all of them are in this database, and all of the law enforcement agencies are entitled to work with this register as they search for this or that individual. So I'm talking here whether it was a good decision to hand over those functions to Ministry of Internal Affairs. Currently, there are two functions that were fulfilled by the commissioner. Those were the negotiations and organization of search groups and search of the missing servicemen on sites. Now those functions were handed over to the coordination staff and Central Directorate for CIMIC, a unit that was established at the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Many might say that in that way the commissioner has become less efficient in their work, but let me tell you something. Look, if we're talking about organization of the search teams, we have to understand that such works are organized at a place where there were intense battle operations, intense battles, or that area may be heavily mined, and no representative of Ministry of Internal Affairs without permit of the military station there or the permit from the general staff can get to that area. This is why the function was handed over to them. They know all of the coordinates. They fulfill all of the search operations in those areas where they get permit to do so, whether it was mined or demined or cleared and released. So in our opinion, that decision was also right to hand over those functions to them, to the CIMIC Directorate. And talking about the negotiations, the process of negotiations, it has certain how do I put it right? It has some level of secrecy, of security of information. And the representatives of the main Directorate of Intelligence, within which organization the coordination staff was deployed, like Mr. Kirill Budanov is head of the coordination staff. So due to the security issues, in view of the necessity to protect the personal data, that information cannot be segregated or divided or communicated to someone else outside their internal organization. So basically, there is a safety to avoid dissemination, unauthorized dissemination of such information, but rather to use it properly with those parties which are involved in such negotiations. So basically, until this moment, we don't know what is the process of those negotiations, but let me tell you something. As a result of those negotiations, it frequently happens so that the people come back to the territory under Ukrainian control that were considered to be gone missing and about whom we had no information at all. And people come back alive, and somehow the main Directorate of Intelligence, they are aware of such information. So in my opinion, that function was handed over to them quite legally and legitimately. There is a disputable issue to what extent does it comply with the law, because the decree of the Cabinet of Ministers clearly stipulates that the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Internal Affairs are supposed to develop a draft law on amendment to the legislation in force. And bringing those provisions in compliance to the law in force. So currently, that law was already developed. It has passed the first reading. It should have been voted in the first half of this year, but some of the people's deputies decided to make amendments and modifications to this law. It was returned to the committee, and on the 10th of July there was a meeting of the committee that was attended by the government commissioner on rights of persons gone missing, and during this meeting there was a decision made to return the law to the parliament for the second reading in current edition, and as the representatives of the committee mentioned, it should be put on the agenda shortly, and finally to be adopted with all amendments, thus removing all those questions to the legal force of the documents adopted by the Cabinet of Ministers, prevailing those adopted by the Parliament. Well, Ms. Dmitro, we understand the condition of the families of those missing in action. You've mentioned 3,000 of them were already returned, but it's about 5% of those who are still being on the search list. For what I understand, the work with the families should be colossal, because the number of those who are on the search list are those who will continue be on that list. So let's try to look at it from this perspective, and let's try to understand. You obviously communicate with the families of persons gone missing, and I think many government agencies are facing difficulties in such communication, because we have to find balance between what we may say and what may be of harm to such processes. In your opinion, to what extent the families may use and the government satisfies their requirements as stipulated by this law, and to what extent do you feel any difficulties in communication with the families? Well, thank you for the question. Let me remind you that one of the missions of our department is exactly the communication with the families of the persons gone missing. And in fact, our activity in this area may not be public, but since the beginning of the year, the representatives of our department have more than 3,000 meetings with the families, with the representatives of the families, and with the unions of the families, because you know this sorrow, it gets people united. They communicate with each other, they communicate with the civil organizations, and in many cases they share information, experience, and help each other. It's really important, because unfortunately, and even from that analytic report, you may see that those whom the families are dealing with in this vertical are the conscription offices and offices for social support. They are the ones who send this information to the family about the status of their relatives, and sometimes the problem is even bigger if they cannot get in touch with relatives, like the relatives may have left the country or may have left the area, or maybe a person may not have a family at all. So in that case, a military unit are supposed to report to the police, to the law enforcement, but the system is built in such a way that the military unit reports to the conscription office and office for social support, and then they don't get any feedback. They don't even find out whether the center would get in touch with the family or the police. And also the families who get notifications, they are not being informed whom they should address, where they should go with that notification. And only if they find that information out from the internet or from the word of mouth, this is how they can find information. But as Ms. Aliona mentioned, if people don't have access to internet, don't use smartphones, if they live somewhere in rural areas, until this day, I can tell you that based on my practice, 1 in 10 missing case, their families, their relatives don't report to the law enforcement agencies. And in those cases, sometimes we try to search for the relatives ourselves, or we initiate the criminal investigation to put that person on a wanted list based on the information that we are being provided from military units. So talking about the communication, there is a hotline, 1698. This is MIA, Ministry of Internal Affairs hotline, and the operators, they see if there is a call to the hotline of the commissioner. They respond immediately and provide this information, whom to report, whom to address, what is the procedure of actions. We've developed more than 10,000 notifications. When the investigators issue such notifications to the recipients, well, so probably you can share those notifications with the conscription offices as well. Well, basically, we've come up with that initiative because it's not only them, it's about the Ministry of Defense. Well, anyway, with those who report to the families of the persons got missing, the first response that we've got that notification is not contemplated by any legislation. So basically, they said that they're not interested in doing this, but it all depends on the regions. In some regions, we get the support from them, but you know, the cooperation with the Ministry of Defense is a whole different topic, because now we're discussing this list about the activities related to the persons gone missing. But if we start talking about the Ministry of Defense, I think that Ms. Olena knows that until this moment, the problem exists that Ministry of Defense doesn't sample DNA from the servicemen being sent to the front lines. In other services and other agencies, this problem is solved with the help of international donors, international colleagues, partners, but still this problem exists in the Ministry of Defense. Meanwhile, it was mitigated in Ministry of Internal Affairs, National Guard, State Emergency Service, State Bodyguard Service. And to demonstrate the extent of this problem, you know, when people were being verified, we were submitting the reports to the Ministry of Defense, and we were inquiring them whether there was investigation established in their relation and whether there were biological samples taken from them as they were being sent to the front lines. And in 90% of the cases, they mentioned that no DNA was sampled from them as the servicemen were being sent to the front lines. So this problem still exists. It should be solved. And on our end, we report reported to the minister. We asked them to mention it during the meetings of the government. And just for your understanding, is third such initiative. And getting back to the communication with the relatives, we are always open. We provide people with all of the support that we can provide. Some civil organizations, they help those people based on their goodwill, and we are the organization which is supposed to do so on behalf of the government. So can you please mention the phone number of the hotline? 1698, the short number of the hotline of the Office of the Commissioner for the Rights of Those Gone Missing. Miss Olena, please join our conversation. You are always in contact with the people, with the families of those gone missing. So based on what you see, to what extent the government satisfies their rights, I mean the rights of those gone missing and their families? Well, good morning, everybody. It was already mentioned to what extent the state guarantees it. It's contemplated by the law. We have a lot of organizations. It's centralized in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and some of the functions are vested in the Ministry of Defense and the coordination headquarters. And me, as a coordinator for the work with the families, it's difficult for the families as they only start seeing it, the beginning of the search, the beginning of the first activities. And based for what I know from the conscription offices, they have the procedure, step-by-step procedure, where to go, where to report, including to whom submit the inquiries for or requests for disbursements. But we have to understand that we're talking about the units of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the procedures for reporting of the persons being missing in other units such as National Guard, National Police, or Bodyguard Service. The conscription officers are not being involved there. And today the actions of the families are more weighted. Well, some of them still continue publishing the personal details online that may be of harm, that may help, for example, the fraudsters to target those families. But the majority of them are already properly briefed. They know that there are initiative groups of the relatives of the families who are already experienced in the situations when their family members become prisoners of war. And they work on a more serious level, and it helps those families who are just starting to face this issue of search, whom to address, where to provide the DNA samples, and so on and so forth. Talking about the DNA sampling, as Mr. Dmitrov has mentioned, the Ministry of Defense approved the procedure for DNA sampling, and it contemplates the mandatory DNA sampling during martial law. But from what I see in practice, there are units that provide DNA sampling, and the servicemen take it easily, but some units somehow say that it should be at the discretion of the servicemen, referring to certain orders that say that DNA sampling should be happening only at the discretion of the warriors themselves. I think that the law on personal details should be amended, because it's sampling of personal details, and DNA sampling by the servicemen whose families are unfortunately dead or who don't have families. In case they go missing, there will be no one to match those DNA samples with. and talking about the way the government guarantees the rights and interests of the individuals. What I'm facing along with the families of those servicemen gone missing, they have close relatives who are of mobilization age, and the law on mobilization identifies that the relatives of those gone missing are entitled for postponement of mobilization. On the 16th of May, the Cabinet of Ministers adopted a resolution number 560 that stipulates in edition C5 the list of documents that the conscripts should submit to be entitled for postponement. And among those documents, there is a court ruling about the assignment of status of a person gone missing, and the law on rights of the persons gone missing under special circumstances says that the person is considered to be gone missing after their information is being added to the joint register of persons gone missing. So basically, it should be only the excerpt from the register, notification from the conscription office, and maybe excerpt from the joint register of pre-court investigations. So basically, court ruling is not a right document. It's not a legit document to assign a status of a person gone missing. And 90% of the families obviously don't have such court rulings. They don't have it because this ruling has relevant legal circumstances for the families. And a military unit, in case of existence of such court ruling, ceases any disbursements to the families. And then, after this court ruling, only a family can start exercising their rights contemplated by the law in effect. So basically, the majority of families, they don't have a need to obtain such court ruling. So basically, the family members of those gone missing, they get the notification on refusal of postponement based on the failure to provide the court ruling. And we were communicating with the Ministry of Defense, saying that it contradicts with the provisions on the law on the rights of the persons gone missing, and even the civil code stipulates it otherwise, and even the wordings used there are not quite right. And what the families are facing, that when they get such a refusal of postponement, meanwhile they even had such a postponement previously based on the fact that their close family members were gone missing, and the question arises, what should they do next? The family is already stressed. They already have loss in their families, and mobilization of yet another or two of the family members may, God forbid, result that they may get even more losses in their families. And as long as the family is supposed to have proper, at least, structure, so there shouldn't be many persons gone missing in one family. And in the same way, the law provides exemptions for the family members gone missing, but somehow the decree of the Cabinet of Ministers number 560 blocked this right of the family members to get the postponement during this special period. So it again requires specific amendments to the decree of the Cabinet of Ministers. It's not such a difficult process as to make amendments to the existing law, but it still should be done. Those families who got such refusals, we help them to dispute such actions of the conscription officers in course, because the Civil Code identifies the Article 4. It says that if the decrees of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine are in contradiction with the civil codes, the provisions of the Civil Code and the laws of Ukraine prevail. So basically, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine is supposed to know it and to understand it, and I would like to believe that this contradiction, this error, will be rectified, and the families of those missing in action will be able to fully exercise their rights contemplated by the legislation. Thank you, Ms. Olena. Let me read a small comment to confirm your words. A comment from one of our listeners. Please pay attention to the oppression of the rights of the families of the persons gone missing as a result of adoption of the decree number 560. I will appreciate if you will continue cover the topic of the refusal to provide the postponement based on the decree number 560. And so thank you for covering this issue. We will continue discussing it. Ms. Liubov, thank you very much, first of all, for being here, and I would like to ask you to share your experience. We know that unfortunately your son is currently on the list of the persons gone missing, so I would like to ask you about something that may help other families that have similar issues. Was that communication sufficient for you, and have you been able to receive the guarantees guaranteed to you by the state? Good morning. I'm a mother of a soldier missing in action. He is on the search list for the 16th month. I've come a long way, and I keep working it every 24 hours. But what I want to say is that only the family of those gone missing need to move their cases, need to push them. I was attending dozens of meetings with coordination staff and the commissioner for the rights of the persons missing in action, even with nuncios of the Catholic Church. I am a member of the families of the territorial defense forces, and our union is numerous. Many of them search for their relatives for more than 2 years. I keep knocking on all of the doors. I know when my son was wounded and where he was left wounded. And we had 8 boys gone missing, and their parents, only thanks to our union, we got in touch with the Commander-in-Chief of the Territorial Defense Forces. After 14 months of search, we were able to check the location, but I still don't know the answer. Unfortunately, 2 bodies were already identified. One of them was already buried. And talking about DNA, one of our 8 boys, he was from either Melitopol or Mariupol, and there is a collision that there is nobody to provide a DNA sample. So his body is in Dnipro now, and we don't know whom to match his DNA with. So yes, this DNA issue is really important. It's necessary. But I keep searching for my son, and it's clear that I will keep searching for him until my last breath. But I want to say that when on the 16th of May, I apologize for the emotions. So when I found out about this Decree 560 on the 16th of May, I was shocked. I have a second son who is a conscript. And now there is this Decree 560. How come? Why? I'm not living, I'm not breathing for the 16th month in a row, because for me, my sons are my wins, my pride, and now suddenly this decree. Well, for the time being, we've submitted all of the necessary documents. I live in the city of Brovary, so we've submitted it to the Brovary conscription office, and I expect to see a positive result. The commission meets once a week, and as of the last week, they have not come up with a resolution about my son. So I beg everybody to rescind this decree, because how is it even possible? Those people ended up in the worst situation possible when your son, your brother, your husband, your father may be gone missing, and this is a story in progress. You just don't understand, because my son who was gone missing, he has a 10-year-old daughter who stopped saying the word father. She was not pronouncing it within the last 16 months. You know, she just tells me, Grandma, I'm tired of talking. I cannot talk about it anymore. So they have to attend the therapist. And this is when she just started talking with me and with her mother. So God forbid anybody to end up in situation like this. This is the worst situation possible. You don't understand whom to go. You don't understand whom to address. You just keep crying at your home, and that's it. So what I want to say, we were visiting your office too, and out of those boys, out of all those 8 of our boys who were gone missing, some of their parents, for example, Pasha Krasiluk, he only has father, and they don't have the certificate of investigation from the military unit, and they still cannot get it. I understand there is an investigation officer who is supposed to provide that certificate, but still there's a lot of issues. I've already gathered all of the documents, because day and night I keep calling, I keep knocking on all of the doors. You know, I keep coming to the coordination staff just as it's my job. And I was in touch with the search team of the armed forces, who still cannot get to our location, but thanks to the Brigade 30 who is stationed there, well, I hope it's not a secret, they've checked our location, and the situation is horrific. Even when you understand how terrible this war is, that no war can be worse, but you still have to continue searching and to be ready to hear the worst news. You know, it's like you are already prepared to hear the worst news, but you live with that hope that what if your son is being held captive as prisoner of war? All those 16 months. Miss Olena, thank you, Miss Liubov. Miss Olena, can you please tell us how to finalize this meeting? There's a lot of issues we have to solve on the level of the civil society, of the state, of the government. We're feeling what is the most pressing for the people, so let's try to summarize it to understand what are the issues that require the solution urgently. Well, when we talk about the fulfillment of the law, we have to start mentioning that it's good we have it, because for many conflicts, the adoption of the law on persons who were gone missing is a matter of decades. But we have this law in effect. We have government institutions who are addressing the issues of the persons gone missing. But we still have to make sure the system works. They work to the full extent to make sure that the guarantees that exist for the persons gone missing, servicemen gone missing, and their families would be also applicable for the civilians. It's important because in the interview we were told about the landing, like what the military are entitled to is the arrears in repayment of loans. This standard is not applicable for the civilians. I think those standards should be uniform for both military and civilians. So for the civilians, they should be reviewed. And it's good we have a communication. It's good we have an agency in Ministry of Internal Affairs. There was a lot of talks whether the functions should have been handed over or not, but it's good that the law is already in effect, along with all the bylaws. The relatives are advised to address different institutions, not one of them, but many of them, and it creates the impression that the more doors you knock on, the better is the effect. And it's important to explain to the relatives, to the family members, how is this interagency communication is going on, because they don't have such understanding at all. And how does it work when you report to those institutions, coordination headquarters, office of the commissioner, and others? It's important to take into account that fact that people may be very different. You have to search for approaches in informing them that would allow us to cover the most broad audience. And it's good, even the relatives mentioned it, that their communication was improved. And among those who never got in touch with the commissioner, they say that the communication is not sufficient, but I think they should be just getting involved. And for what I understand, talking about the Decree 560, there is a draft law that hopefully will be reviewed shortly, because on top of this sorrow in the families, they get this feeling of injustice that should definitely be changed. Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank everybody for bringing up such an important topics, and us as Ukraine Media Center will support you in covering those topics which are important for our society. Thank you for joining us, and we continue working together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Thank you.